Lone Rider here, and just got done watching a video that Scala Gladiatoria from England put up, and Scalagrim, another channel that often talks about historical weapons and historical swordsmanship, also did at least one video about this. Um, a proposed series of new laws or edicts. I'm not sure exactly how the government works in England. Um, and I'm not going to pretend to be, but basically, the Home Office of England has um, set about coming up with a new bill that's going to further restrict the ability of people in England to obtain edged items, sharp items, so knives essentially. And the initial proposal was something to the effect that they would not ship knives to anybody under 18 that were over 3 inches in length. Now, the problem is that I think you already have to be over 18 to buy knives, let's say from an online shop or merchant, and have them delivered. I got a couple pocket knives, very similar to this type of thing. Um, I think one of them was actually the Spyderco Bird Cara Cara. Um, this particular one, I think I actually bought in a brick and mortar store, but the Spyderco Bird Cara Cara was my first online purchase, and it was one of those things. You give them your I got debit card information or whatever, and they send you an email confirmation, and then they mail you the thing. And I think you have to click a little box that says I'm over 18 or whatever. I don't remember the details, but it was the first time I bought a knife online. I just couldn't. There was a lot of snowstorms. I couldn't get out. I didn't know any. I didn't know that there was a Spyderco dealer in my area. I hadn't yet discovered that particular shop, so I um, I ordered it, and there was a little bit of delay, probably because of the weather, but it came. It was supposed to be like several days delivery, and it took about a week. But anyway, it did come in, and it came in a little box, and that was fine. And it lives in a drawer in my desk with my other knives when I'm not EDCing it. But although the Cara is a little long for EDC, it's got a fairly beefy blade, which is why I went and I bought the Spyderco Meadowlark, which is the Spyderco Bird Meadowlark, which is the shorter one. Like this, it has a blade that's 3 inches or less. So, and it's not really so much for any legal thing. It's just I'm comfortable carrying a smaller knife. I've done that for years. I carry a knife as a tool, not as a weapon. So, the whole idea is to have something to open boxes, packaging, chop things, cut string, whatever you need to do when you have a knife that you might not be able to do if you didn't have a knife. And I've never really understood these type of restrictions, whether it's you know people who want to ban guns, or whether it's people who want to ban knives, or whether it's people who just want to restrict them. It doesn't, you know, it's kind of like underage drinking, which has always been a problem. Oh, teenagers are getting drunk and they're crashing their cars and they're hurting people and they're getting sick. They're getting poisoning themselves from having too much alcohol. But it's already illegal for people who are underage to buy alcohol, and it's already illegal for people who own a liquor store to sell alcohol to somebody who's underage. So passing more laws isn't going to necessarily solve that problem. We saw this with cell phone use in cars. As a cyclist, I can't tell you how perturbed I am by people driving a 1,500-pound metal box down the road that's powered by a series of small controlled explosions, and they're looking down at their screen, texting, going like this. I mean, like, have you no respect for the sanctity of human life? Well, I think for a lot of them, they're not out to hurt you. They're just careless. They're just, they don't realize it's dangerous, whatever. Well, you know what? It's dangerous. If you haven't got that through your thick skull by now, you shouldn't be driving. But I was never in favor of restrictions on cell phone use while driving. The other day, I stumbled across a little essay I wrote on the subject back in the, I guess, late 90s when it started to be a problem. And of course, as the cell phone turned into the iPhone, and it wasn't just an issue of talking on the phone and being distracted by that, but by people surfing the web, texting, twittering, all sorts of things, it became even more of a problem as more features got added to the device. But initially, my theory was that Well, we don't need another law. They could just ticket them for careless or reckless driving under existing statutes. The problem is they didn't. So, in desperation, people passed more laws outlawing that particular type of careless and recklessness. And now there's just a whole other set of laws on the books that people are willing to disregard. Um, so I kind of, if there's already a law against it and it's being broken, passing another, you might want to look at enforcing the laws you already have better or more effectively. Um, if it is in fact something that poses a risk of harm to others and should be outlawed, like driving drunk or something like that, or driving on the cell phone, for example. Um, People owning sharp objects or purchasing sharp objects, I don't think poses a risk of harm to anybody. And Scholar Gladiatoria hit this on the nose. You know, he talked about first of all, it's not really going to do anything to damage crime because people have sharp objects in their homes. Whether it's scissors, whether it's screwdrivers, whether it's a kitchen knife. Virtually every house has one of these things. So, people are going to want to go and grab a screwdriver, grab a knife, and go do something awful with it, rob somebody, murder somebody, whatever. If that's what you're worried about, you really kind of have to turn everybody's house upside down and take away all their kitchen knives and tools. And obviously they're not going to do that. I think this is a case where the government wants to be seen as doing something so they can justify the fact that they wear a suit and a tie and have an office and have a job. The government people really want to be seen as doing something, which is fine as far as it goes until what they're doing is actually counterproductive. And as an American, we're having the same discussion here about guns, and I'm looking over at England, where Scholar Gladiatoria is basically saying the same thing that I've been saying about guns, but about knives and swords and other edged weapons or tools, as the case may be. And his point is, they're throwing a lot of innocent people under the bus who haven't hurt anybody. This is going to not only inconvenience people, but it could lead to people losing their livelihood, businesses being shut down, people not being able to pursue their hobbies and interests, etc. And the point he really made was that any restrictive legislation has a downside. The only way restrictive legislation, whether you're talking gun control or knife control, could not have a downside is if it didn't actually restrict anything. The moment you start restricting items, people's property, whether it's making it harder for them to buy it or whether it's making it illegal for them to own it or whatever, you run into the fact that the vast majority of people who own that item aren't going to hurt anybody. So this is the worst legislative trade-off ever. You inconvenience the entire country. You throw, as Scholar Gladiatoria put it, lots of people under the bus for no reason, and it doesn't accomplish anything. The problem that I see is that when Scalagrim did his video on the subject, he was talking about the restriction in terms of people having to prove their ID, and prove that they're over 18 before they purchase it. What Scholar Gladiatoria was talking about in his later video had nothing to do with being over 18. It was like a blanket prohibition on the posting of edged items with a blade longer than 3 inches. Now, will this include razors? Will this include, pocket knives? Will this include kitchen knives? Will this include swords? And this is, Scalagrim's channel and Scholar Gladiatoria's channel all talked about this, I think, from the perspective of people who are aficionados of tools and weapons. And Scholar Gladiatoria in particular runs a fencing club. And Scalagrim, of course, is also a weapons collector and a fencing participant. And I'm a human noob. I mean, I got into this last year, fencing with swords. I think it's awesome, And this isn't a bad thing. This is an athletic activity. This is a historical activity. The swords are blunt. They're not sharp. We wear protective gear. And we're basically bringing back a historical weapon system that's been lost to time and making history live again. And I think that's pretty damn cool. We're also getting a little bit of exercise, hanging out with people we might not have otherwise met, learning new things. What's wrong with that? Well, nothing. Just like there's nothing wrong with somebody wanting to buy a pocket knife because they need a pocket knife, or somebody wanting to buy a set of kitchen knives for their kitchen. Uh, could somebody who wants to go online and buy knives turn out to be a criminal? Possibly. But, I mean, you might as well say we should take away all the guns in America because, you know, well, gosh, what if one of those millions and millions of law abiding gun owners actually turns out to be a psycho or something? The problem I have with this attitude, whether you're talking about guns, knives, or swords, is that your approach is to posit the worst case and most unlikely scenario and totally ignore the fact that all the other people who are good people who are obeying the rules, who aren't hurting anybody, are going to be hamstrung by this, are going to be, as Matt Easton said, thrown under the bus. Uh, and a legislation that restricts knives is particularly worrisome because uh, it's not just knives in terms of what we normally think of as a knife, a short bladed implement. It was sort of open ended. It was anything with a blade larger than X. Would that include swords? Would that include antique swords? Would that include sharp reproductions? Would that include blunt reproductions that are used for sparring, like this longsword? I don't know. I mean, I bought this used off of a fellow fencing club member. I've had my eye on various online swords. It would be a shame if I wasn't able to purchase one. Now, I'm in America, okay? So this isn't going to affect me here. We can still get swords. We can still get knives. Hell, we can get guns, okay? I know they can get guns in England, but the laws are stricter there. Here's the problem I have, though. The precedent it sets. Governments, when one government does something bad in one state or one country or one province, it's not like it happens in a vacuum. Other people look at that, and a lot of times they want to copy the worst of the ideas. There are people right now who are saying the laws in America should be more like England. I would argue that you should take a look at England because, with all due respect to people like Scala Gladiatoria and Matt Easton of Scala Gladiatoria, for example, who raised this issue, there are things about England that, like, I would not want to live there because of certain rules. And one of them is the amount of restrictions, the very idea that the government would want to make it hard for you to purchase edged weapons that are legal to own online. It's not like, certain types of guns where people argue that the ownership should be restricted and you should have to, go through some special thing to get that particular type of gun because it's more dangerous. We're talking about a knife that or a sword or any other thing that has no restrictions on ownership. You don't have to get a license to own it. It doesn't have to be registered. You don't have to get like a firearms ID card to buy or knife ID card, whatever, to buy it. All you might have to do is show that you're over 18. When the over 18 thing is pretty common pretty much everywhere for online sales, I think. So my problem is I'm looking at this and I'm like, is this our future, right? Right now in America, we're having this discussion when it comes to guns, and right now it's kind of only stayed on guns. But if you look at FBI statistics, you're 4 times more likely to be stabbed to death than you are to be, or at least 4 times, than you are to be shot with a rifle of any kind, let alone a semi-automatic AR-15, which is the type of gun they're vilifying right now. So isn't restricting, for example, AR-15s 4 times as stupid as restricting screwdrivers, since, well, you're 4 times more likely to actually be stabbed than you are to be shot with a rifle of any kind. Obviously, a rifle makes a much more effective weapon. There's no question that a person armed with a rifle can kill more people and with greater ease than a person armed with a screwdriver. But the point isn't which is a better weapon as some kind of abstract idea. The point is which is more likely to actually be criminally misused. And even in America, with our high degree of firearm ownership compared to many other countries, you're 4 times more likely to be stabbed to death than shot with a rifle of any kind. More than 4 times, according to the FBI's own crime statistics. Now, nobody in America would say we should ban or restrict knives or screwdrivers. That would be seen as foolish. However, the same people
don't seem to see any logical disconnect between applying that logic to guns. Uh, I would argue that it's actually, many times more foolish if you're less likely to be shot than stabbed to restrict guns. So uh, it's even more silly, I guess. But my problem is this: the method's the same. People could argue, well, a gun isn't a screwdriver, a gun isn't a knife. One is a hand tool or hand weapon, the other one is something that can kill from a distance, and yada yada. Yes, that's true. But while the degree to which the items are similar functionally can be debated, obviously they can both be dangerous if they're misused. The degree to which they're similar functionally can be debated. But the degree to which the government's responses are similar cannot. What the government in the UK is doing with knife crime is exactly what the government in the United States has been proposing for at least the last 20 years as regards to gun crime. And the downsides are exactly the same. Lots of innocent people, lots of innocent businesses, lots of innocent people with a hobby or pastime that's thrown under the bus because somebody in the government wants to be seen like they're useful and they deserve their job and they're doing something. Now, it gets a little worse because I don't own any guns, but what do? I fence, all right? Now, I support the Second Amendment in the United States. I certainly believe that the average citizen should be free to own firearms. I think guns are cool. I'm going to be honest. I just don't happen to own any. Maybe that might change someday. Who knows? They're kind of expensive. But I do shoot bows. I'm an avid cyclist, and I fence with historical swords, longsword in particular. So, um, you know, this is in England. It doesn't affect me personally. But, I have to look at it as somebody who's doing pretty much the same thing that all the people at Mr. Easton's club are doing. They're fencing with historical swords, and they want to buy a new sword. Where are they going to go? He made the point just talking about modern fencing swords like epes. He said in his video, look, you can't always go down the street to a local epee store and buy an epee for fencing, for your fencing club. You know what? That's even more true for HEMA stuff, for historical European martial arts. While modern sport fencing may be a fairly niche activity, historical fencing is even more so. A lot of the smiths that make these swords, Peter Regnier comes to mind, are based in Eastern Europe. Are you going to get in your car and drive to Eastern Europe? I mean, it might not be possible if you're in England unless you take some kind of a ferry, you know. But the point is, are you going to physically travel to Eastern Europe to pick up that sword? No. Then it's going to have to be mailed in the post. And so beyond the thing with, worrying about whether or not criminals get their hands on knives and underage criminals and blah, blah, what effect would this have on something like an activity like historical fencing? It's bad enough if you can't get that pocket knife you want. That's a nuisance, but there's still going to be pocket knives that you can access. But if you want a longsword that you can spar with, or even a sharp longsword as a collector's item or to practice test cutting or whatever, where are you going to get it? Now, you might get fortunate and know a blacksmith who's really talented. That's great, and he may make you a sword. I mean, I had a friend of mine who brazed me a custom bike frame because he was a I don't want to say frame builder by that wasn't his livelihood, but he was an experienced bike mechanic and he ran a bike shop and he did do frame repairs, and as a side gig he built custom bikes for a handful of people. I happened to be lucky enough to be one of those. He later taught me how to braze my own custom frame, and I made a really nice lug steel frame with a lot of interesting features. But the point is, the average person who wants a custom hand brazed bike frame is going to have to pay a lot of money for it. And very probably the builder won't be in their neighborhood, maybe not even in their state. You want a Tom Kellogg frame? He's not in New Jersey, I don't think. So what are you going to do? It's out of state. You're probably going to have it shipped. All right, you're probably going to have it shipped. Now, with a bicycle frame, that's no big deal. Nobody's saying they should crack down on bicycle frames. They are saying they should crack down on weapons. And in England, it's gone so far, apparently, that they're not just saying, well, we don't want people to have guns. They're worried about people having knives. But obviously, if they worry about people having knives, the same laws could restrict access to swords. And so my problem is the same problem that Scala Gladiatoria has. These mental midgets are not thinking clearly. They want to be seen as doing something, and they're not realizing there's a whole community of people out there who collect these things, who fence with them. You know, when you have swordfish or long point or one of these other big fencing tournaments and events, you have people come into town from not only out of town, but from other countries. People from America travel to Europe. People from Europe travel to America, etc. And they stay at hotels, and they go out to eat, and they go to the pub or the bar, whatever you call it, and they hang with their friends, and while they're at the hotel, maybe they order a movie, they're taking taxis, they're taking cabs, etc. Maybe while they're in town, if they're a cyclist like me, maybe they rent a bike if they didn't bring their own with them. They might buy swords or other equipment, fencing masks, jackets, etc. from local makers. They might just buy souvenirs while they're there. It contributes to the economy. And guess what? If you lose all the business from edged weapon or tool-related things, whether it's something as simple as you lose an internet sale on a pocket knife, or you have a custom knife maker who's making really high-quality knives and can't sell them now because he can't put them in the post, or whether it's, you have people who want to do historical fencing and can't even get their hands on a longsword because nobody's allowed to ship it and they're not going to drive to Czechoslovakia. It's the same problem I have with gun control in America. The only difference is, at least I guess I could sort of see that from our perspective here, there's a lot of people who don't know about guns and so therefore are scared of them. So I sort of understand I don't agree with gun control and I don't agree with the people who want to restrict it, but I see the appeal of gun control for somebody who literally doesn't know any better. Guns can be kind of scary. And they are actually used in criminal acts. But we're talking about things like swords and stuff. When was the last time there was like an epidemic of sword crime? In 1562? I mean, seriously. I don't understand it. Now, it may just be an accident that things like this policy could end up cracking down on access to swords. Maybe their intent literally is just to go after knives. But as Scala Gladiatoria, as Matt Easton pointed out on the Scala Gladiatoria channel, most houses have things like kitchen knives or screwdrivers just lying around in the house, as part of the furnishings and the tools in the home. So if you're really worried that some punk's going to get his hands on a knife and go rob somebody, or a screwdriver or any other stabbing or cutting implement and go rob somebody, every house is an armory if your idea of a weapon is a screwdriver or a kitchen knife. And, so maybe they should have considered this in this rush to make like we're doing something. We're going to throw all these people under the bus. All these people who practice swordsmanship, all these people who might want to get a new pocket knife, etc. They're going to be screwed. Whole fencing clubs might go out of business. I honestly don't understand how anybody can have this kind of mindset. I mean, I never really liked the idea of banning things. To me, it smacks of, self-righteous authoritarianism, the idea some edict is going to come on down high and say, you can't own this. And I understand the argument that, well, if they really are used in crimes a lot, you know what, then maybe you should ask yourself why they're used in crimes a lot. Because if every house has knives in it, as every house does, why are some people using them in crimes and not others? Is there a problem with people being taught morals and the value of human life? Are there a problem with, maybe there's some economic problems that are leading people to become so destitute they turn to crime, or they just grow up in an area where that's taught as the norm for their peers, and they just accept it. Is there a problem with gangs and gang violence? If so, what can you do to curtail that? Uh, Essentially, the same questions we should be asking in America about our gun crime. And I do think I mean, no disrespect to Mr. Easton, uh, who I've profited immensely by watching his videos on history and swords and other things, and he's always well spoken and articulate. Uh, but I do think it's funny that he's sitting there making the same arguments about how this rule will throw innocent people under the bus and not really affect knife crime. And in America, we're at the stage where we're still talking about the same rules for guns and gun crime. But the arguments are exactly the same, and the stupidity of the restrictions is exactly the same. And I know before you get into, well, with a gun, you could shoot maybe 15 people. With a knife, you get maybe one stab in before somebody takes it away or you're disarmed. Maybe, maybe not. Obviously, a firearm is a more effective weapon than a short stabbing implement. There's a reason the United States military doesn't equip their troops with screwdrivers. However, while one could debate the similarities in function of the items, the fact is the response of the government is identical in both cases. On the other side of the Atlantic Ocean, thousands of miles away, they're doing the same thing they're doing here. They're just a little further down that line of logic and a little further to its, I guess, inevitable logical conclusion, which of course is totally illogical policy that throws regular people under the bus and criminalizes regular people and makes it harder for them to live their lives to realistically not really any significant impact on crime, I don't think. At least if the legislation is as it's been described so far. And of course, we don't know the details. What are they just going to limit it to knives, or is it going to include anything, including sparring swords? In which case, you're going to put a whole culture of swordsmanship out of existence. People worked really long and hard to try and rediscover the historical weapon systems used in HEMA. The first and second generation people, guys like me who are come lately people to HEMA, we benefit from having experienced people and instructors and experienced students we can talk to who've already had to figure out a lot of this stuff. Back in the day, in the beginning, they had to work really hard to try and dope out what the techniques were and how they worked. And a lot of it's still being worked out, to be fair. But now if you do something that's going to sink a lot of those sword fighting clubs, for those people, they're going to be as out of luck as they were 20 years ago. The difference is they won't be able to get their hands on the practice weapons even. No. I think the government has an obligation, whether you're talking about the government in America with guns or the government in England with edged items, the government has an obligation to consider the downside of every piece of legislation, to consider all the innocent people that it's going to affect. And they should have to do sort of I guess, the fairness equivalent of a cost-benefit analysis. Is it worth it to violate the rights of millions of people so that you maybe deter one crime? I would argue it's not even worth it to violate the rights of one person. But, then I'm a little more open-minded on these things. And I have I hate to use the word animosity, but I do. I have a real animosity towards anybody who wants to tell other people how to live in terms of restricting their freedom or the property they can own or the actions they can take if you're talking about actions that don't hurt anybody else. And going fencing with a longsword or buying a new pocket knife because you're tired of the old one doesn't hurt anybody. I don't understand why these things should be the subject of restriction. And all I could say is, again, no disrespect to Matt Easton, but thank goodness I'm here in America. The problem is I look around our country and what I see is England maybe 10, 15 years earlier. I look at where Mr. Easton is now in a situation he's in with this intrusive legislation, and I see where we will be several years from now, maybe decades from now, if we do not put our foot down and say, enough of this junk, enough of this crap. You know, no, it's not up for debate. You're not going to start taking stuff away from people. And for anybody who says, oh, yeah, anybody who thinks that gun control advocates actually want to take people's guns away, well, first of all, it would be disingenuous to be a gun control advocate if you didn't, because how can you restrict something without actually restricting something? If your idea is that, for example, nobody should own a semi automatic rifle, well, how do you accomplish that without either making it illegal to own one, illegal to buy one, or prosecuting people who do in fact own them and taking them away? There's there's really no way to be a gun control advocate and not support taking away people's guns in some way, shape, or form. You might not support taking away all the guns, but certainly you do support taking away some, or you wouldn't be a gun control advocate. So it's disingenuous when they say, oh, we don't want to take your guns. What are you, nuts? But for anybody who really does wonder if the gun control advocates actually desire to take away the property of law abiding citizens or not, or if that's just a side effect, um, look at where England is now. And then imagine what it would be like if your town or your city in America was like that. I would not be happy. I would be most unhappy. I would be most displeased. And I do have an animosity towards, bullies and thugs and some guy sitting in an office 2,000 miles away who wants to tell me how to live. Um, and maybe that animosity is a good thing. Maybe if somebody had been willing to say, you know what, I know you say you mean well, I know you say it's for the greater good, whatever. I don't buy it. I'm putting my foot down. Maybe these poor folk in England wouldn't be in that situation, all right? Because there's good people there just like everywhere else. And the thing that bothers me is I can see it coming here. I really can. When you listen to the hysteria of some of the gun control politics, is it that much more difficult for somebody to believe that somebody could argue that we should not be able to have swords or knives or anything else? You remember that video Scalagram did where he posted a sparring match, and somebody actually said, I think sword practice should be banned because you're teaching people how to use weapons. Now, he didn't say he thought swords should be banned. He just said he thought sword practice should be banned. But the point is that there are people out there like that, and not just when it comes to guns. So we can't think of this as a gun thing. We have to think of this as a philosophical thing. I think the ultimate question is, whom does your life belong to? You or the state, the government? If your life belongs to you, then, well, yes, we all have to obey certain rules and norms in society and, all drive on the same side of the street, for example, and, to avoid needless carnage. At the end of the day, if you're not hurting anybody and somebody wants to intrude into your life, your hobbies, your interests, or your home, no, that's wrong. Okay? I don't care how you sugarcoat it, what face you put on it, or what you call it, it's wrong. And this example from England is all the proof we need. This is where gun control goes if left to its own devices. And there are good people in England. There are, one of the things that kind of annoys me is, I see other Americans posting, well, it serves them right. They banned guns. What did they expect would happen next? Yes, I think all of us, because we're still in the position where they haven't fully banned guns, are looking at England and sort of seeing the ghost of Christmas future, and we're unsettled by it. So our response is to mock. I do think they should have stood up more. Maybe they wouldn't be in this position. But I don't live there. I don't know the culture. I'm not, I can judge, and of course I'm going to judge, but I'm going to judge with the knowledge that my knowledge is incomplete, that I'm from another country with another culture, and I don't really know what it's like in England. I've never actually been there. But I don't think in any country people should be subject to the kind of vague, cockamamie restrictions that Matt Easton was describing. And certainly from the standpoint of somebody who practices historical fencing, we can look at this as sort of a window on the future of what the gun control debate in America might look like when they get done with guns. But I can also look at it as somebody like myself who fences with a longsword and who thinks these things are cool. I don't want to lose that.